If we're gonna run our race well, we need to see the finish line and the prize that comes at the finish line. Every follower of Jesus is moving towards a common destination, which is we wanna see the things of God come to earth. We wanna see God's love come into the lives of people we know. We wanna see God's grace and God's mercy intersect the sin and the brokenness and the anxiety and the fear and the depression that so many people that we know live in. We want to see healthy homes and healthy marriages and free lives and healthy relationships, right? This is kingdom come type stuff. And that's the finish line. And the prize on the other side of the finish line is Jesus himself. He is what we're going after. Knowing him as intimately as we can know him this side of heaven, and then making him known to the world around us. That is the race that we are all a part of. And what Paul is saying here is don't run aimlessly. Don't just say yes to Jesus and then kind of wander through life, but put in some effort. Run like you're trying to win the prize. And some of us, when we hear the word effort, when it comes to the gospel, that doesn't make sense to us. We're not sure, where does effort fit in the gospel of grace? And I'll first say, yes, you're right. The gospel of the good news of Jesus Christ, that we can be forgiven and set free because of Jesus's death and resurrection, that is a gift of God's grace. We don't earn that. We don't have to work for that. We just put our faith in Jesus as the Son of God who died and rose again for us. What I'm talking about today is maturity. What I'm talking about today is running our race with freedom and fulfilling everything that God has on us. And y'all, here's the news flash. Not every Christian fulfills all that God has for them. They might say yes to Jesus and get salvation, but never fully walk in, live out the race that Jesus has for them. And my heart for us as a fellowship is that we would all run our race with endurance and that we would keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. And that requires some intentionality. That requires some effort. John Ortberg says it this way: walking with Jesus requires as much effort as learning to play the piano or training for a marathon. Again, we don't have to work hard to get saved, but we do have to be intentional about growing into a person of love. We have to become intentional about maturity. Every one of us needs to incorporate in our lives spiritual practices. And here's one way to define it. These are holy habits found in the words and the ways of Jesus. When a disciple would respond to a rabbi, they would end their previous way of life and they would take on that rabbi's words and ways. His ways, the way that he lived, and his words, the things that he taught, they would take those things on. That was called their rabbi's yoke. And they would adopt those practices into their lives. And in the same way Jesus asked his disciples to follow him, he does the same for us as well. When we say yes to Jesus, he's then inviting us not just to believe what he says, but actually apply it to our lives. You kind of have to learn how to extend your endurance and pace yourself to the very end. These are the fundamentals, right? This is just a part of racing. This is what spiritual practices are. These are the fundamentals that Jesus just wants you to begin slowly as you can to involve in your life and to put into practice in your life. Galatians 5:22 and 23, Paul explains what the fruit of the Spirit is. This is evidence of the fruit of the Spirit of God living inside of you. And he describes it this way: the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. Fruit can't be manufactured. Fruit can't be engineered. Fruit has to be cultivated. And the spiritual practices are the place where the fruit is cultivated in our lives. But here's something that might help when it comes to the spiritual practices. All of them, based on how we're wired, we can relate to them as either uphill or downhill practices. Think about running up a hill. Nobody likes to do that. It's hard. Think about running downhill. You feel like you're faster than you actually are, right? And spiritual practices are the same way. Based on the way you're wired, there are certain spiritual practices that are gonna feel uphill. Like you're really gonna have to discipline yourself to put this in your life. And then there are other spiritual practices that are gonna feel like a breeze. But all of us are gonna have those things in our lives. So think about this. If you're an introvert and you just heard me talk about silence and solitude, you're like, oh my goodness, Jesus gives me permission to shut the door on all the annoying people in my life. This is awesome, right? But then you also heard me talk about community and you're like, I don't know about that, right? Or flip it. If you're an extrovert, it's the opposite. Community might come easy to you, but shutting the door and quieting your soul might come really hard to you. Uphill and downhill. If you want to grow in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, because if you're going to do your calling, you need to have that kind of character. When you try to fulfill your calling without that kind of character, you hurt and confuse people. But when you fulfill your calling through a character of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, you become a blessing to the world around you.